Rob's wife, Jamie. Recognition on our screens of our club corporate sponsors. We have 4 currently. Aultcare's Primetime Health, Dr. Peter Ferguson, Wilkshire Golf Course, and Liberty Ford. Announcements for today. Please turn off all cell phone and sound emitting devices. Turn them completely off, or at the very least silence them, please. The Pro Football Hall of Fame Luncheon Club media guides, we announced first that were available last week. They are still available for $10. It's a 74-page color presentation of the history of this club from the beginning through and including last year's speakers. It's got some real nice color shots and just a nice memento if you care to look through it. They're in the back room seat, Jim Mitchell. Tickets for our next session at the Nash Center at the Pro Football Hall, which is going to be on Monday, November 21st. That's the week of Thanksgiving. They will be sold today through November 14th. So if you didn't get them today, you have 2 more Mondays to secure those. The 14th is the last chance to purchase, and you do have to have a ticket. They're available in the back starting at 10 o'clock before luncheon starts, or if you want to get them afterwards, they will be open today. It's from 10 to 10:45, and then afterwards from 1 to about 1:15, maybe 1:20, depending on what the line is like back there. You do have to declare at the time of your purchase whether you want Salisbury steak or scrod, so that we can mark the tickets accordingly and they'll know what you're going to have that day. I'm happy to announce a couple of things. One, Mr. Lyndon Smith, our trustee in charge of memberships and whatnot, he informs me that as of today, we have 403 paid members, and of that 403, 41 are new members to the club this year. So that's really nice. And even on a better note, a longtime club member, Walt Zimmer, who happened to have lost a wedding band at the Nash Center, it has been found, and so that's unbelievable in and of itself. So that's awesome. One of our members asked me to announce there is handicap parking out here. It is designated, but if you are handicapped, we would certainly like you to use those. But please remember to hang your handicap tag in your vehicle. And if you aren't handicapped and can make the walk, please don't use those spaces. Let's reserve those for those that truly need them. Happy to say there is no illnesses to report nor deaths. And next up on the agenda is our raffle. So get out your tickets. I do want to give a thank you, a huge thank you to Dick Stayer, who has been subbing at the selling of the 50/50s. Because our normal guy back there is Ron, and Ron's in Florida taking care of some family business. And so, Dick, would you just wave where you're at? Right down here. So today was Dick's last time to sit in for Ron. Ron hopefully is back with us next week. But thank you very much, Dick. Okay, our 50/50 this week is worth $180 to the winner, and Jim Osborne will be happy to, if you raise your hand and have that winning ticket, he'll come and check it and present you with the cash. Okay, here we go. Rob, you get the select one. Give him a good coffee here.
That's what my dad did, right?
Yeah, it would. That'd be awesome. You got one out. Here we go. Thank you. The winning ticket is 544511. The last 3 digits, 511. Right there. All right. We got a lady today. Nice, excellent. You can buy that extra turkey or dressing and gravy or whatever heading to the holidays. Okay. Next week, our speakers will be Jerome Pruitt, who was drafted in '65 in the 5th round out of Lehman High School and by the St. Louis Cardinals. Jerome played baseball in Stark County around the country for 48 years, from 1956 through 2004. He played under contract with the St. Louis Cardinals baseball organization from '65 to '70. He was awarded a major league contract in 1967. And heading into our featured speaker today, let's have a warm welcome for Canton Repository sports columnist and longtime club friend and great reporter locally, Steve Dorsey.
It's a beautiful day for baseball. We got a baseball guy here, but if you please keep the doors shut, it's not that beautiful. Sitting with Rob here, it kind of reminds me that he hasn't changed a lot since I knew him when he was playing baseball. Oh, and I should have said, Jack, Marilyn, Jamie, ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thanks for hearing me out here for another 90 seconds or so. But I brought Rob's 1989 baseball card with the Wichita Wranglers, and he'll be delayed a little bit because he's going to autograph the card for me today before he gets up here. But the point, the fact that a guy has a baseball card is you're going to be listening today to one of the very best baseball players who ever came through our parts. And Rob didn't make it all the way to where he would like to have gone. Probably everybody, or at least 80% of the people in this room probably grew up playing the second base for somebody, dreaming you were going to play for the Cleveland Indians. He got very close. And the highlight of his baseball career, perhaps, in addition to having done very well at Jackson, where he's in the Wall of Fame, sorry, Rob, and Malone, where he's in the Hall of Fame, and he's also in the Stark County Hall of Fame. I'm not sure the official name, but he's in a bunch of Halls of Fame. This will tell you more than all those Halls of Fame. And that is, after he went to Paintsville, Kentucky to begin his minor league career out of Malone, and forget about asking where Paintsville is. You can't get there from here. Rob took a covered wagon to Paintsville and went to Beloit, Wisconsin, and then Stockton, California, in the San Francisco area was where he played the kind of ball that tells you that there weren't many guys come through our area who could do what he did. And in 1986, I think it was, and I don't even have to look at this stuff I looked up. I committed this to memory because Rob's been a good friend for a long time. He hit 312, drew 77 walks, scored 98 runs, hit 14 triples. He's a pretty fast cat. He probably still is, but he was really fast then. The 14 triples led that league, and in the league was Roberto Alomar and some other pretty good players. He had 14 triples, nobody else had 10. And he had 77 walks. I think that led the league in walks. But the point being, he was a really, really good player. Then after he got done with his 5 or 6 year career in the pros, he came home and was MVP of the Class A league. Just a quick anecdote to talk about Rob, the person, and the friend, and the man, and the good guy. Aside from being a really good baseball player, was. I'm working on a story that is running in the repository right now. It's the 25th anniversary of the Cleveland Indians almost winning the 1997 World Series. And the last guy I talked to said, shoot, I haven't talked to Sandy Alomar. Not sure I can get a hold of him this time of year. The Indians or the Guardians was still playing ball when I needed to get a hold of Sandy. But he called back, and I told him early in the conversation that I knew Rob DeWolf because I knew that Rob and Carlos Vallarta and Sandy were teammates with the Las Vegas Stars, AAA ball. at one point. But this kind of struck me. It didn't surprise me, but it struck me. But I say Rob DeWolf early in our conversation with Sandy, probably for my own selfish reasons to grease the skids, but to have a better conversation with Sandy about the 97 World Series. But he says, Rob DeWolf, how's he doing? Where is he now? And he says, give him my number and ask him to call me. And that told me that, wow, people, Rob leaves an impression on people, and he did. And, long story short, they did get in touch and hung out a little bit. But, I won't get into the long newspaper career that Rob had after baseball, since I've been up here long enough. But he did work at the Louisville Courier Journal, worked in the New York metro area for a paper there, worked at the Repository for a while, and some other places. But without further ado, it's a great privilege to introduce Rob DeWolf.
So regarding that 50-50 drawing, I can't tell you how happy I am I didn't pull my dad's ticket, because we would probably have a riot. I don't know that I've been probably this nervous since stepping in against Randy Johnson in the pouring rain. But I think we'll get through it. First and foremost, happy Halloween. And, in anticipation, had an idea in anticipation of the holiday. Those stores that pop up about the beginning of September, Halloween party stores, they sell everything, right? They sell costumes, decorations, and everything. And I had an idea a few days ago. I went in there, I went up to the counter, I said, I need a costume. And the lady looks at me like, well, yeah, no kidding, you came to the right place. I need a costume of a speaker who's going to be speaking in front of 200 or 300 people. I need this costume to be of a speaker who gives a great speech. All the jokes get laughs. All the stories are informative and interesting. At the end of the speech, they give him a standing ovation. They carry him out to his car on their shoulders. That's what I need a costume of. Where are they? And do you have one in my size? She looks at me, pauses a couple of seconds, and she says, we're all out. We just sold the last one. And we're not getting any more of them in. So that's the bad news. The good news, however, is the guy who bought the last one is Jerome Pruitt, who is speaking next week. So if we can get through today, you got clear sailing ahead, okay? This is kind of a trifecta for me. When I started at the repository back in the early 90s, I covered the Hall of Fame Luncheon Club quite often and sat over at that table over there. And that was my first exposure to the Luncheon Club. And fast forward about 20 or 30 years, and my dad, who's 96 this year, retired and started attending. And so I've sat out there with you and listened to speakers. And then today I get to be up here and talking to you. And that is honestly like hitting a trifecta, because I have a long history with the Luncheon Club. And I just appreciate it so much, because even though I've played around the country for baseball and worked around the country with newspapers, like I always have been and always will be a Stark County guy. I loved growing up here. I loved going to college here. I loved working here. And it was because of people like you and of traditions like the Luncheon Club that exist. And I can just tell you, like, I've lived all around the country, and you know what Stark County has, especially their passion for sports and for high school sports, man, I haven't seen it in a lot of places. And so when I tell you that it's a real honor to be here, I think a lot of speakers kind of use that as a throwaway line to get into what they're talking about. Please know that that comes from my heart. It is truly an honor to be here. So thank you. That being said, when Jim asked me to speak, it didn't take me long to say yes. And honestly, one of the big reasons is I knew my mom and dad would get a kick out of it. And I don't think no matter how old you get, you always want to please your mom and dad. But I also said, you know, really? Like, why would you want me to speak? And he's like, well, you know, you have the minor league, you're a minor league baseball player, you worked in journalism, you were a sports writer. And while all that's true, it's like, well, my last year in the minor leagues was 1989, which wasn't exactly yesterday. Newspapers, you know, hate to say it, but in the last 5 to 6 years, don't have nearly the impact that they used to when I worked there. So I'm thinking like, gosh, you know, am I kind of outdated to get up and like talk about things? But then I thought, well, maybe that's what you talk about is just how things have changed. And I don't think I really need to talk, like you as readers of newspapers kind of know how they've changed in the last 5 or 6 years. So I don't think I really need to like dwell on that too much. We could talk about how they got to this point. I don't know how interesting that is, but I can tell you how baseball has changed. And Jim and I were talking, and he said, you know, does it seem like it's been that long since you played? And my gosh, it hasn't. But then, you know, you start counting by decades, and it's like, gosh, it's been like more than 30 years. And it just, I'm sure a lot of you feel the same way about when your kids were growing up or when you were in college. It just seems like it was yesterday, but it wasn't. And so when I see the changes that have happened in baseball, it surprises me and it astounds me. But then I also think like, well, yeah, it's been 3 decades. Of course, things are going to change. Steve mentioned Sandy, and Sandy and I had not talked since my last year in pro ball, which was 1989. And as I think most of you know, he's first base coach for the Indians. And I say the Indians not as a slip of the tongue. They are the Indians to me. They always have been. They were the team I grew up with. They will always be the Indians to me. No change by an owner or by a commissioner. My license plate, when you're leaving on the Black Highlander, is 48 Tribe, which tells you how much of an Indians fan I am. One quick story on that. About 10 years ago, I was pumping gas, and we live in Westerville, which is north of Columbus. I'm sitting there pumping gas at a Kroger, and I see a guy, younger guy. He's like 2 or 3 stalls over. And I'm just sitting there minding my own business. And he gives me a nod of the head. And he's like, Travis Hafner. And I'm like, does this guy think I'm Travis Hafner? Because I don't look like Travis Hafner. And I'm like, yeah, Travis Hafner. He's like, no, your license plate, 48 Tribe. And I'm like, Travis Hafner, where's 48? I'm like, yeah, I like him, but no, this was like 1948. It's the last year the Indians won the World Series. And he looks at me like, what? I said, yeah, they won the World Series in 48. He's like, oh, and he just kind of shakes his head. And I'm thinking, so it was okay. You thought it was really cool that I had a license plate that honored Travis Hafner, great player and everything, but you're shaking your head in disbelief that I have one that remembers like the Indians' last World Championship. So, but anyways, Sandy and I were talking, and he was just saying, we were talking about the old days back in the 80s. And he's like, Wolfie, you just would not believe how the game has changed. And I'm like, yeah, I know what you mean. He's like, you don't know what I mean. And I don't know if you all have been watching the postseason, but every once in a while, they'll show a shot in the dugout after a player has an at-bat. And he's back in the dugout, and he's looking at an iPad. And they'll say like, oh, he's just watching his previous at-bat, which is a really simplistic way of saying it because they are watching the at-bat. The amount of information that players get back to them in real time almost. So not only is he seeing video of the at-bat, a lot of times he'll be watching a split screen, pitcher on one side, batter on the other, and it'll be measuring, and not to go like too inside baseball here, but it'll measure, when the ball leaves the pitcher's hand, the spin rate of the ball, which is like how many revolutions per second, if he's throwing a breaking ball, that breaking ball is making. The velocity of the ball as it's coming out of his hands. Obviously, the more it's spinning, the faster it's going, the quicker the break, the harder it is to hit. So it's measuring all that. It's showing the batter where he is in his swing and in his approach as the ball starts to break, just like a crap load of information that just like almost makes my head explode. Because I said to Sandy, I go, could you have like hit like that and performed like that, knowing all this information is available to you? Because to me, it would paralyze me. And he just said, no, absolutely not. He goes, I kind of get it, but I really don't get it because it's just like a different game now. He was telling me a story when they were in Tampa near the end of the season, and they were facing a pitcher for the Rays who had been in the big leagues before, but he hadn't been up this season. And I don't remember his name. But Sandy was leaving the hotel, walking down the hallway to go to the ballpark early. And as he's walking by one of the rooms, one of the Indians players is in the room with a bat. And he's got, if you're familiar with like the virtual reality, I guess you call them masks. I don't have, but anyways, you wear them on your head and it's basically like you're in this, it's not a video game to where you're looking at it. You're actually in the environment of whatever you're watching on this virtual reality thing. So the player's in his hotel room with a bat, with a virtual reality, and he's taking swing after swing after swing. And Sandy walks in, he says, what are you doing? And he says, oh, I'm taking at bats against so-and-so, whoever was pitching tonight for Tampa. He goes, I've never faced him before. And he's like, how you doing that? And it was like a video game that this pitcher was on. And he goes, I've taken about 600 swings against him, 300 against his fastball and 300 against his curveball. And so it's like before he even got to the ballpark, he's taken not real batting practice, but virtual reality batting practice against the pitcher that he's facing that night. And I just hear that, and it just boggles my mind that the game has changed and has advanced so much. For those of you who maybe are involved in high school and college baseball, scouting was the biggest, was such a fabric of the game at all levels. You just needed scouts, and you needed them even at the professional level to scout opponents, to scout other, obviously, prospects that the team might want to trade for, to scout teams, whatever. And it was, a pretty expensive endeavor for teams because you had to hire a lot of scouts. They travel. You've all seen the movies of scouts who travel the country and just spend 2/3 of their lives sitting in ballparks. And that's just a bygone era for the most part right now. And I just find it fascinating because I know how important scouts were to the game. But the way that teams will typically scout other teams now and evaluate their own players. Do we have like a lot of golfers here? Okay, so you're probably familiar with like TrackMan, which if you hit a ball off a mat, it'll tell you the flight of the ball, tell you all kinds of statistics about the balls you're hitting. There's a device called Rapsodo, which does the same thing. There's a lot of these type of devices that can track movement and break it down for you and all these stats. And so they have these now in every major league ballpark, all over the stadium, and they're very small. They film video, but they also track a lot of what's going on in the game. So just to give you an example, I was an outfielder. So as a defensive outfielder, a real key is taking good routes to the baseball. So if I'm standing in center field and the batter makes contact, I want to get a good break on the ball, and I want to be able to judge. Good outfielders are judge. Okay, I see the ball, I see the trajectory, I have an idea where it's going to land. So it's my job to sprint to that spot and try to catch that ball before it gets there. So I'm in a position to make a good throw into the infield. So bad outfielders or lazy outfielders sometimes will just coast to the ball and get to the ball at the same time that it lands. So in the past, you would rely on scouts to watch during a game. And it's like, oh, DeWolf took a pretty lazy route to that ball. And they write it in there and they send it back to the front office. But now all that's tracked. They have a video and they have devices trained on the batter. They have them on every defensive player. So they have video and they have it broken down. As soon as that ball was hit, it took Rob DeWolf 4/10 of a second or a second to make a break toward the ball. And now here's the route that he took. And you can see he started off this way, but then he had to veer out and slow down. And it breaks all that down. And it's not relying on a scout's eye to tell them that. And it's just like they pay companies to set up these cameras, to set up these tracking devices and everything. And you don't have to pay scouts. You're just paying the companies to like record this information, to send it back to you, and you use it however you want it. And it's just like, to me, that's just something I never could have envisioned. And it really has changed the game, because when you see players now and you see the expertise that they're performing at, a large part of it is because teams have been able to evaluate those players and to get the best ones in at the major league level that can perform like how you're seeing them. Whereas before, maybe they were just relying on a scout's intuition or whatever. So just like another insight of how the game has changed. And finally, Sandy and I were talking about Terry Francona and how much we liked him as a manager. And Sandy made the comment, he goes, he said, when guys like Tito and Tony La Russa and Bruce Bochy, he goes, when they get out of the game, he goes, you're not going to see like long time, I like to call them old school baseball guys replacing them. He said, so many of the managers you see in the minor leagues and at the major league level as coaches and that who are coming up, they know baseball, obviously, but in college, they studied analytics and they studied probability and statistics and everything. So they're they're managing the game, but not so much the players and I don't know how familiar you are with analytics, but it breaks down, you hear it a lot in football. It's like, okay, if you're down 4 points and you're at a certain yard line, it's late in the game, on fourth down, do you go for the first down or do you go for a field goal? And a lot of times analytics based on previous results of that situation will tell you over the long run, this is what you want to do. And many times what analytics is telling you what you're going to have success for the most part, it goes against like our common way of thinking. It's like, well, no, you get a guy on in the ninth and a tie score, you bunt him over. Been doing it that way for 140 years. Well, no, analytics might say no, based on who's pitching, based on who's on deck, based on a myriad of things, you need to hit away. And as fans, sometimes you're used to seeing something for 50 or 60 years. It's like, what is that idiot doing? And it's like, well, he's listening to the statistics telling him over the long run, over the course of the season, this is what you want to do. And so Sandy was saying, much like the other side, he's like, I get analytics and I understand what they're telling us, but he goes, they're not second nature to me like these guys coming out of college who are managing and who are coaching at the professional level. And he said, that's what teams are looking for right now. And I noticed in the NFL, I was watching the game a couple weeks ago. If you can, next time the Dolphins, you're seeing, if they show the sideline, look how young Miami Dolphins coach is. He's like 32 or 33, and he looks anything like Mike Ditka, like the prototypical football coach. I mean, this guy looks like he would be doing my taxes, but he's an analytics guy and he gets it. And it's like second nature to him. And the Miami Dolphins are like, this is the kind of guy we want. And a lot of baseball teams are. Do you remember the movie Moneyball? Which like, yeah. So think of Moneyball. Like, so, and I just love that movie. And it's funny. I love the movie. My daughter and we watch it all the time because she likes to see the scouting side of it that I've told her about when I played. But the ironic thing is like Billy Beane in Moneyball, I would be the type of player, I'd been the last player that the Oakland A's would ever have signed because I stole bases, which those type of analytics say you don't steal bases because the reward of stealing a base isn't worth the risk of giving it out. I didn't hit home runs, hit out line drive. So I was like the anti-Moneyball player, but I still like the movie. But the thing about Moneyball is in that era, they were basically using past stats to evaluate and predict future performance of players, just going on numbers. Well, now we're at like Moneyball times 100 because it's not just the stats they're looking at. It's like the information they're getting, like I was talking about, filming and videoing every game and getting all this numeric feedback, they're using that every day. So it's almost like, for as groundbreaking as Moneyball was, it's like, okay, now you've got so much more information coming in, and you're not relying on something that happened last year or 2 years ago. You're using information that just happened the day before. So again, it's just to me, sports in general, but especially baseball, the changes that you've seen. The other changes you've seen, obviously, which to me, everything I just talked about is exciting. I don't agree with all of it, because I believe sometimes, okay, analytics might tell you one thing, but it might tell me to go out and pull my pitcher. But if this pitcher's been in this position 3 or 4 times this season, and he's been able to reach down deep and get this guy out, dang it, I'm going to stick with him because I owe that to him. And I don't think analytics factors that into it, but it's still a pretty mind-boggling thing. But the other thing, the way baseball has changed, and you all probably know this if you're baseball fans, is just the goal, I think, of Major League Baseball, and I say that as like the commissioner's office, their biggest goal to me is, let's get the game and compact it so it's a 2-hour or 2-hour and 15-minute product. So we're going to put guys on base, on second base in extra innings to end the game sooner. Next year, we're going to limit how many times you can throw over to first base. We got to outlaw the shifts. No more shifts. I'm not a big fan of the shifts, but I totally believe, just like in life, it's like you don't make any changes in a vacuum. Every change that you make, it's going to have an effect on something else. So right now, defensive shifts where you have 3 guys on the right side of the infield because the left-handed hitter is a pull hitter. Yeah, they're popular right now, but seriously, you don't have to be a baseball genius. How do you beat that shift? Well, you tell that left-handed hitter to drop a bunt down the third baseline, and you do that enough, and the shifts are going to take care of themselves. It's like, well, we're not going to do this as much as we have. But there's no patience. It's like, well, I can't lay a bunt down. I'm expected to hit 35 home runs. It's like, well, somebody needs to, in the management of the team, say, look, we need to beat this shift to score runs. But it's like, it seems like everything is reactionary on baseball right now. It's like, well, we need to fix this problem right now because that's the problem. Well, now we got a new problem, so we're going to outlaw shifts. Well, now we got a new problem. No throwing over to first base. A lot of this is, like I said, to compact the game and make it quicker. And I think you're really impacting negatively the integrity of the game. If you ever get a chance, and I didn't realize this until probably 2 or 3 years ago, I found on YouTube or somewhere online, the actual radio broadcast from some game in the 70s. It doesn't even matter what, it could be any game, but it was the actual radio broadcast. And it was the commercials between innings. It wasn't just chopped up. It was like if I took a microphone, set it by the radio, and recorded for 2 hours, that's what I was hearing. And it stunned me. And I didn't remember this, even though I listened to a lot of games on the radio when I was that age, was in between innings, you would have 1 minute of commercials, if that, 2 30-second commercials, okay? So and now you've got 2 minutes plus. It's like if you think you probably are getting up and going to the refrigerator to get something to drink in between innings, but you listen on radio or on TV, there's a lot of time between half innings. So just doing simple math, I was thinking, okay, there's 2 half innings for every inning, 8 innings in a game. If that's 16 breaks plus 1 in the 9th inning, so 17 breaks. The amount of commercial time, so teams can make more money, so Major League Baseball can make more money, is double that now. So if it was 17 minutes of commercial time during games back in the 70s and 80s, and now it's 30 to 34 minutes, well, you've just added 15 minutes on to the game. So here's an idea. How about cutting down the commercials and stop screwing around with the integrity of the game by trying to get games to end early? But that's not something that's going to happen. So, on one side, I look at baseball and I'm really excited by what's going to happen. But then other times I look at it like that and think man, we got a guy running the game who he didn't really care about the game. I mean, think about when we went to the playoffs this year. Suddenly, the rules that you played with all during the season. Well, if we're tied in the 10th, we put a runner on second base. Except when we get to the postseason, then we're not going to do that anymore. It's like, well, then what's right? You're telling me putting a runner on second base in extra innings, that's not the right thing to do. Because if it was the right thing to do, you'd do it in the playoffs. You wouldn't just do it in the regular season. You're basically telling me you don't care about the integrity of the regular season. And as a baseball fan and as a former, baseball player, like I always loved baseball because 162 games, man, longest season in pro sports. But I thought it really identified which teams were the best when you got to the postseason. And I'm just not sure that that's really the goal of baseball anymore. So not to be a downer, but that's just one thing that, I look at and I say, boy, I wish things were different in that respect. Another thing, I guess you can call this a change. When I was growing up, I read everything I could on the history of baseball. I loved devouring it. I mean, I could tell you, as a middle school or high school about guys who played in the 1910s and the 20s. I knew a lot about the 1920 Indians. That was just me. I mean, I just really devoured everything I could. When I was in AA with El Paso, my first year, Duffy Dyer was our manager. I knew, as soon as I knew he was our manager, I was like, he was a backup catcher for the 69 Mets. One of the greatest come from behind teams ever. And I would talk to Duffy about it. And I could tell, one day he said we were sitting in the hotel bar. And I was asking him, what was Nolan Ryan like in 1969? Was Koosman really was he one of the best pitchers in the league? And Duffy's looking at me. He's just what are you doing? How do you know about these guys? And I'm just well, I've always just been a fan of the game. Talking with Sandy, Sandy was a 6-time All-Star. He played 20 years in the big leagues, and he played 11 years in Cleveland. He was MVP in the All-Star game while playing for the Indians. That was in Cleveland. If you remember, he hit that home run off Mariano Rivera in the playoffs. I was working in New Jersey then, Yankee territory. I was working that night on the copy desk at the paper, and that game's on TV. And Sandy hit that home run, and I jumped up and was screaming. I had 30 faces in the newsroom all turn and look at me like I was some kind of idiot. Because who's the guy rooting for Cleveland in New Jersey? It's well, that would be me. But anyways, Sandy was saying how most of the players on the Indians right now, they don't even really realize that he played, let alone the extent and how good he was. And I'm like, you're lying. He's like, no, Wolfie. He goes, I'm telling you. He said every once in a while they'll play highlights on the video board from the 95 and 97 Indians that were in the World Series. And they'll show, and Sandy's in those highlights. And invariably when that happens, one or two guys will be like, Sandy, you played here? He's like, yeah, I played here. You played in the big one. What position were you? It's well, I was a catcher. Oh yeah, you kind of got a catcher's body. And it's you got to be kidding me. It's you would somehow be a little bit familiar. You don't have to be a student of the game. But again, it's not like he played back in the 1930s. I mean, he was playing in the 80s and 90s, And just when he told me that, I was just shocked that, it's just a different type of player, And it's when a couple days before the Phillies and Astros started in the World Series, Major League Baseball TV showed a replay of the Phillies and the Astros in the 1980 playoffs. And I was a junior in high school then. And of course, I got to watch this. And I'm looking at players who are coming up to the plate. And they look like all of us. They're 5'11", 180 pounds, but they hit, 280 in the big leagues that year. And it's if you watch any of the World Series this year, these upcoming games, just take note of every Astros pitcher who comes out of that bullpen. I mean, they look like MMA fighters. They're all 6'3". They got shoulders out to here. They're throwing 98. Steve and I were talking the other day how the new 100 or the 100 is the old 92. When I played, and not that long ago, you didn't have guys routinely hitting 100 miles an hour on the radar gun. And now it's like you got 3 or 4 on a staff who might maybe not hit 100, but they're throwing 98, 99, you know? And it's not just 1 or 2 guys. You know, it's like every guy out of that bullpen is throwing that hard. And every guy just has bodies that you would associate with like a football team. And it's just, you know, it's obviously just better training, better training. But then I haven't had anybody explain to me how back in the 80s and before, a guy like Wilbur Wood, who pitched for the White Sox, he was probably 6'1", 260. He could throw 300 innings a year, but now you've got these great physical specimens who we need you to go 5 innings and then you're done. So it's like I haven't quite figured that one out yet, but I'm sure there's a reason. Something I should have mentioned when I first started, and I apologize for this. I know that typically the format here is the speaker speaks, we leave time at the end for questions. And I know it's like sometimes it's like awkward if you wanted to ask a question or make a comment about something the speaker talked about in the first minute. If while I'm talking, if you have like anything that you want to bring up or talk about, raise your hand because you're not going to throw me. I'm just kind of up here. I got some notes, but you won't interrupt me. So if there's anything, you know, that I mentioned that you want to comment on or ask a question, feel free to. The other thing, a lot of people ask me, like, what was life like in the minor leagues? And for me, you know, I was ready when I got drafted out of Malone in 1984. I was a seventh player. I was drafted in the 7th round by the Brewers. I was the 176th pick. Not that I remember all that off the top of my head. But so and I was ready to love baseball. I want to be a professional baseball player. Like, what could be better? You know, especially when you're playing at a small school in Canton, Ohio, you're playing maybe 35 games a year, you know, when other colleges are playing 60 and 70. Another way baseball has changed. So the first round of the draft was always on a Monday, and it was always the first 2 rounds. I knew I wasn't going to go in the first 2 rounds. And so I'm thinking about it. I think in the second day, I could probably have a chance because I think it was rounds like 3 through 15. And I thought, like, yeah, I got a chance to be in top 15. And I had an idea of scouts who told me, I'm really putting in a good word for you. You know, I thought I'll go to probably either the Dodgers or the Giants or the Red Sox. Those were the 3 teams. So sitting around the house, like, I don't know. This was 1984. I don't know what time the draft starts. It's not on ESPN. It's not online. I mean, here I am in an abyss, you know, waiting for the phone call. And, you know, it's like, the morning goes by and I'm like, okay, yeah, I wouldn't hear anything yet. I don't even know if it started yet. I don't even know where it is, where the draft's being held. 2 or 3 o'clock comes by, haven't heard anything. But now the phone calls start, or the phone starts to ring, you know, the phone that's hanging on the wall, not the cell phone. And every time it rings, I'm thinking, here, it's Buzzy Babashi from the Dodgers welcoming me to Los Angeles. Pick up the phone. Oh, no, it's a friend of my mom's wanting to know if Rob's been drafted yet. I'm like, no, I'll call you back. Hang up. So we have dinner, my folks and I do. It's like 6 o'clock, haven't got a call yet. And I'm like really, really bummed. I'm disappointed. I'm like, I'm going to go Maslin Merchants. We're playing in the A-League down at the high school. We lived out in Jackson Township. I'm like, I'm going to the A-League game. I just got to get out of the house. I can't sit by the phone. Thinking I'll leave for 2.5 hours. When I come back, they will have called, right? So I go to the A-League game, which was a mistake because what did everybody ask me at the game? Hey, did you get drafted yet? Like, no, thanks for asking, no. So I make it through about 5 innings, and I can't stay any longer. So I go back home. Okay, here we go. Finding out. Walk in, and I can just tell before I even ask my mom and dad by the looks on their faces. Nobody's called. Anybody call? No. I even called Jim Johnson at WHBC thinking, well, maybe he's got that secret wire in the back room. Like, he knows where I got drafted. You know, he's like, well, I don't know. Like, why would I know? So I go to bed that night thinking, well, you didn't go in the top 15 rounds. And as a junior in college, I had the option of going back to school. So now it's like, well, now I got to think about that. So the third day comes up, Wednesday. I don't hear anything till like 4 or 5 o'clock. And I'm like, how did I not get drafted? it's like all these scouts telling me, and it's like, I was like just crushed. And finally about 6 o'clock, the phone rings. And I'm just like, day before, hello, I'm, ready to talk to somebody. Now I'm like, yeah. Rob, Jerry Kraft from the Brewers. Oh, hadn't talked to the Brewers once. I'm like, hi, Jerry. He's like, hey, did you get our telegram? I'm like, your telegram? No. He goes, oh, yeah, we drafted you yesterday in the 7th round. I was so dumb. I'm like, the 17th round? He's like, no, the 7th round. I'm like, no. He goes, oh, we sent a telegram. Well, they didn't send a telegram. They sent one of those like mailograms, which came Friday in the mail. So that was my entrance into pro ball. And it was a great experience, obviously, but man, what a rocky start. And Jamie and I, my wife now, we were dating at the time. She was at Ohio State. And it's like, I love going to Malone. I love playing for Coach Starcher, but let's face it, it's not like you're playing in Texas or Florida where the staff has a lot of experience with the draft process and can prepare players. Well, here's what's going to happen. I mean, Coach Starcher didn't know that because I think we'd had 2 players drafted in the history of the school. So I didn't really know what to expect. And I called my wife, or my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, and I said, hey, I got drafted. And, we're excited, feeling very blessed. I said, the bad news is I have to leave in like 2 days to go to rookie camp in Beloit, which neither of us expected. And it's like, man, when you don't know what's coming, it's like, be careful what you wish for, because you know how you were when you were in college and you were dating somebody. It's like, really? Like, I have to leave in 2 days and we've got no time to prepare for this, and that was one of the many shocks that I experienced in pro ball, or entering pro ball. But it was something I look back, and as you can tell, just me recapping this from memory, and it's something that's like burned in my brain, and I was really fortunate. I just had great support staff and Coach Starcher in that, and we lost him too early. I miss him every day, but you'd be amazed. Like, I think Malone College has always had a great baseball program, and let's face it, small college baseball doesn't get a lot of the headlines in that. Man, I can tell you, when I went to that rookie camp for 5 days in Beloit, and I'm out in the outfield, and they're telling us the Brewer way to do cutoffs and relays, like you go in the gap. This is who you look for to throw the ball to, and there's certain ways to do it. And it was like the Brewer way was the Malone Pioneer way, because I was just like, oh man, I've been taught this for like 3 years. Amazing how many things in pro ball I came across and was taught how to do that I'd already done at Malone. So I was just like really fortunate to be able to go to a school like that and to be prepared. I mentioned Coach Starcher. So in 1985, I was in Beloit, Wisconsin in A-ball. And we were playing Peoria. And Coach Starcher, he had come down and watched me play in Paintsville in rookie ball the year before. And he and his wife drove up to Wisconsin for a few days to watch me play. We were playing in Beloit. And we were facing Peoria, and on the mound was Greg Maddox. Greg Maddox wasn't Greg Maddox at that point. He was like a second-year pro. I think he got drafted out of high school, so he was probably 18 or 19. And so I come up late in the game was decided. And for some reason, if I could ask Greg Maddox one question, I would say, you probably don't remember this. Back in 1985, you had me 0-2, no balls, 2 strikes. I had been days late on your fastball because he actually threw pretty hard younger in the minor leagues than he did when he learned how to pitch in the big leagues. He actually threw pretty hard. I was so late on 2 fastballs. And he was a thinking guy. He was like one of the smartest pitchers ever. And he threw me an 0-2 changeup. Well, if you're behind on fastballs and someone throws you a changeup, it just makes your bat quicker, right? So 0-2 changeup that I hit out of the park for a home run. And so Coach was there for that. And again, Greg Maddox wasn't Greg Maddox yet. But in like 5 years, he was Greg Maddox, Cy Young Award winner and best pitcher in baseball. And one of the assistant coaches said, Wolfie, you would not believe how many recruits have heard the story of you hitting a home run off of Greg Maddox from coach when he's recruiting him. And I thought, man, if I could give that to him for all the stuff that he gave me, then we are even. And I just always got a kick out of coach telling that story. Okay. I got another story, but if you got questions, I'd love to hear them because I would rather answer what you want to know than just sit up here and talk. So if you have them, raise your hand. We're not getting out of. I came to pick up my dad 2 weeks ago when the McKinley-Massillon coaches talked. And you guys were out of here like 20 minutes early, like the cars were leaving. I'm like, how do the McKinley-Massillon coaches get out of here 20 minutes early? So we're going right up to, we're going right up to 1 o'clock. Okay. So because I got like plenty to talk about whether you want to hear it or not. But sometimes people say like, so who was the best pitcher you faced or whatever? I can tell you this. So this wasn't in pro ball, but 1984 was the first time they had baseball in the Olympics. Well, they had it back in the 30s, I think, but they brought baseball back. And so the way they were going to form the Olympic team was they had tryouts in every state. Depending on the size of the state, they might have just had one tryout, but it was open tryouts and any college amateur players could come and they had a tryout process. And so whenever like Major League Baseball teams, or in this case, the USA Baseball Federation, whenever they hold tryouts, here's how it works. You all show up, you get a number. First thing they do, because speed's very important, they time everybody in groups of 2 or 3 in the 60-yard dash. Well, welcome to Rob DeWolf's world, because Rob DeWolf could run a little bit. So I always knew, all right, this is always going to be a good start for me, because I could run fast. And it wasn't a skill, it was a God-given ability. So invariably, I would be one of the quicker guys at this tryout camp. So that's the first thing they do. The second thing they do, put you in the outfield, throw balls from the outfield to gauge your arm strength. Again, I had probably like an average major league arm, which in the scope of minor league baseball wasn't that great because they were looking for above average. But in the scope of like 150 guys at a tryout camp, 75 of them who were working at Jiffy Lube and just came over on their lunch hour, that arm looks pretty good, right? So I've been able to run fast, put up one of the quickest times, been able to make good throws from the outfield. Then they make a cut and they have a scrimmage. And a live scrimmage, 5 or 6 innings. And that's how they did it at the Baseball Federation for the Olympic tryouts. And it was down in Ohio State. So long story short, I make the cut. I'm the one guy coming out of Ohio to go to the national final tryouts in Louisville, Kentucky in a few weeks. Or it was actually the next spring. And that was like huge for me because I'm down there. I think I had a Dr. Pepper Class A jersey on because I didn't want to wear my Malone one because I didn't think anybody would know what Malone was. So it's like, well, the Dr. Pepper jersey was like really cool looking. So I wore that. And I'm down there with guys from, Ohio State had 15 guys there, all these big schools, guys came down from Michigan. And like, I'm the guy that they picked. And I just had a good tryout. So I go to the national tryouts in Louisville in the spring. And just terrible, terrible weather for like 3 days. It's just raining. It's cold. It's 40. Who knew Louisville in the early spring that it would be like crappy weather? And I had like strep throat. So it was like, oh, this is perfect. I'm feeling sick. We finally go out. We do a lot of indoor workouts. We finally go out and have an outdoor workout where we're going to take batting practice against the pitchers. And it was kind of just like, they didn't really have a plan. It was just like, DeWolf, Smith, Jones, you're up. And you don't know who you're facing. So they call my name. I go into the batting cage. And they call out to the bullpen, Johnson, you're pitching. I don't know who Johnson is, I knew pretty quick who Randy Johnson is because you don't really miss him. 6'10", left-hander out of University of Southern California. So Randy Johnson was kind of wild in the big leagues. Imagine what he was like in college. In rainy weather, in 45-degree weather, coming from California. And I'm thinking to myself, you got to be kidding me. Like, I beat all odds to get here, and I got to face a 6'10" guy throwing 95 left-handed from down here, and I was a left-handed hitter. So I'm standing there, my knees are knocking, and this is who I get to face trying to make the U.S. Olympic team. And needless to say, it did not go well. I think I made contact with one pitch, To be fair, I didn't deserve to be on that team anyways, and it was a thrill to be there. But when people ask, like, so who was the most intimidating pitcher you ever faced, I didn't even have to get to the minor leagues to answer that question. It happened in Louisville as a college player. So that's a memory that just, will always stick with me. All right, I'm going to stop talking. Last chance to ask any questions. Or
what do you think the chances are of Sandy being the next manager in Cleveland when Francona finally retires?
I think he would be, because he's interviewed with Chicago like once or twice. I honestly think, and then this is just me speculating, I honestly think with the move to analytics and everything, I don't think very good. I really don't, because I think they're going to be looking for guys who are more fluent in the new way to manage. And like Sandy said, like, I get it, but I don't totally get it. I think that could hold him back, because I just don't think you're going to have
a lot of Latinos on the team. You would think you'd want somebody that.
Yeah, but that changes too. Like players turn over, and honestly, it's like Francona's not Latino, and I mean, look at the chemistry of that team. It was really good. I would love to see him. I was hoping he would get a chance to manage in Chicago, as much as I didn't want to see him live Cleveland, but I don't know that that's going to happen. So.
You were speaking earlier of the way technology has taken over baseball.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of the idea that they're going to do? I think it's in 2024, where having the computer call balls and strikes.
Oh yeah. So the question was, with technology, in a couple of years, they're toying with it, I think, in the minor leagues next year, having computers call strikes instead of obviously human umpires. I don't know where I stand on that, because I don't know if you can cheat that system. I've always liked baseball for the human element. And I think the more you take the human element out of it, the more you take away from baseball. And it goes more than just replacing a human umpire that might miss a pitch with a computer. I think you just change the fabric of the game a lot more. So I would probably lean on it. So last one.
Why wouldn't Francona throw Bieber against the Yankees? There's only one game left. What do you say?
I know. And, Francona repeatedly, and the question was, why didn't Francona throw Justin Bieber in the 5th game against the Yankees? And it was like the whole injury thing. They didn't want to rush him back or whatever. But it's like, but then he said, well, I thought the move there, listen to me, but I thought the move there, even if you just started, like, have him throw an inning, just to get you off on the right foot, like, hey, you're throwing one inning. I don't care if you strike out the side on 9 pitches. You got one inning and that's it. I mean, throwing Savali in that situation where, he's just had a rough year. He's been injured. It's like, was anybody really shocked when he got knocked around that first inning? I don't really think so. So anyways, again, thank you so much.